When you think of Westeros, your mind goes to the spectacular. Massive dragons scorching the sky, and ancient undead armies marching through the snow. Beneath this high fantasy spectacle, the movement of the world is anchored in tangible, ruthless, real-world economics. To make a world of fantasy feel believable, author George R.R. Martin anchored his lore in historical reality. He built an economic machine that operates on strict historical precedent rather than fairy tale logic. To see how that machine works, we have to look past the high lords and battlefields. We need to go down to the absolute bottom of the socio-economic ladder, right down to the local farmers. Because if you want to understand who truly holds power in this universe, you first have to understand the basic supply chains of everyday items. Westeros operates on a strict feudal system. The vast majority of citizens are relegated to agricultural labor, exchanging a portion of their crop for protection. However, large-scale, centralized manufacturing simply does not exist, which leads to a surprisingly important question. Why isn't there a central factory on the continent mass-producing basic wooden tables and shipping them out to all the different keeps? This map illustrates how economics of scale typically work. A single specialized facility reducing costs and shipping goods across a large area. But in Westeros, that clean supply chain is constantly and abruptly severed by unpredictable warfare. There is zero incentive to build a large-scale furniture business if your target customer base in the next region might declare war on you or be completely wiped out by winter, by next season. This constant instability forces regions to rely on isolated, unspecialized labor. It is why the war-torn North uses highly utilitarian, basic wooden tables, while a stable, heavily populated area like King's Landing supports specialized craftsmen making ornate, detailed furniture. Because local lords cannot safely industrialize and build domestic wealth, they are trapped. When they inevitably need to raise a massive army, they cannot rely on local taxation. They have to seek extreme outside capital. That capital comes from across the ocean in Essos. Enter the Iron Bank, the shadowy foreign financier that single-handedly bankrolls the continuous conflicts of Westeros. The Iron Bank is heavily inspired by the real-world banking houses of the Napoleonic era. Rather than a magical alt, it functions through intense bureaucracy, with clerks meticulously processing the endless paperwork of war. Historical institutions like the House of Rothschild essentially laid the groundwork for modern finance. They treated hostile, warring governments exactly the way a modern bank treats a standard applicant asking for a home loan. Around this time, the introduction of expensive new military technologies, like cannons and muskets, made warfare incredibly costly. Governments were forced to rely on massive, high-interest loans just to stay competitive on the battlefield. These international banking houses cared nothing for national loyalty. They craved peace and stability so they could collect their interest. They strictly funded whichever leader offered the best credit score and the lowest risk of default. There is an old financial adage: if you owe the bank $1 million and you can't pay it back, you have a problem. But if you owe the bank $1 billion and you can't pay it back, the bank has a problem. This chart compares the Iron Bank's total wealth against their exposure to Lannister debt. Tywin Lannister weaponized this exact concept. By taking on an astronomically high level of national debt, he inextricably tied the Iron Bank's own survival to his family's success. With so much capital tied up, the bank was trapped in the sunk cost fallacy, guaranteed to continuously fund Lannister armies. But then, Cersei Lannister executes what seems like a brilliant tactical victory. She forcefully plunders the immense wealth of a rival region and pays the Iron Bank back in full. By wiping the ledger clean, she inadvertently handed the bank the freedom to walk away. They were no longer financially dependent on her survival. The bank immediately ran a new cost-benefit analysis. Now that they were free of risk, they evaluated the board and chose to immediately finance her enemies, a faction that offered much lower risk and, of course, actual dragons. By following the cold logic of sovereign debt and risk assessment, the story demonstrates that the ledger outlasts the sword. In this universe, the debt collector is the one power that remains standing after every king has fallen.